Music production is a gratifying process that involves a lot of skill, creativity, and attention to detail. But even the most experienced music producers make simple mistakes that can affect the quality of their work. In this video, I'll discuss 5 mistakes music producers make and how to avoid them. Starting with mistake number 1, unnecessary layering. Thinking back to when I started learning music production, the one thing I kept hearing over and over again was, you need to layer more. I had no context for how or why I need to layer, and I just thought more layers equals better. Although layering can be great for adding depth and texture to a track, it's easy to fall into the trap of unnecessary layering, which leads to a mix that sounds muddy and cluttered, and overall just makes it much harder to mix. My advice for this is to just keep it simple. Rather than trying to layer up sounds to make your track sound fuller, consider whether you could completely replace a sound or sample. 90% of the time when a client sends me a track that they couldn't mix properly, it comes down to the fact that they'd used sounds that don't work together. Just keep it simple and layer with specific purpose. Mistake number 2, not leaving enough headroom. Headroom is the space between the loudest part of your track and 0 decibels, which is basically the limit of digital audio. So understanding that there's a technical limit for how loud things can go means you should be working below that limit. So how do you know whether you've left enough headroom? When it comes to headroom, there's no one right answer. But as a rule of thumb, I would suggest about 6 decibels. In your DAW, have a look at your master channel and see where your mix is peaking. If you're peaking above -6 dB, select all of your channels and bring down their faders a bit until you're sitting at that -6 dB mark. Theoretically, you can't leave too much room in digital audio, but it does become impractical in the sense that you'll end up running out of gain when boosting your master channel back up. I have all of my tracks set to -6 dB by default. This gives me a bit of a safety net in knowing that I already have some built-in headroom and gives me more than enough range on my faders to mix comfortably. Mistake number 3, not using reference tracks. Reference tracks are essential to get a sense of how your mix compares to other commercially successful tracks in the same style or genre. Depending on whether you're using the reference tracks for mixing or writing purposes completely changes the way you should listen to them. For example, if you're using a reference track for mixing or a client has sent you a reference track for a mix, you should be listening to things like the volume relationship between elements and the type of processing used. You should be asking yourself questions like how natural or processed do the vocals sound, are the drums super compressed or saturated, or maybe even is the mix bright or dark. This list can go on, but it's important to truly engage yourself when listening to reference tracks, and rather look at the overall sonic image of a track rather than trying to dive into specific compositional elements like melodies and rhythm. Now, if you're using references for production style or genre, you should be listening with a completely different mindset. There you'd be mentally trying to dissect a track into its main components. You can break almost all instrumental tracks up into 4 main components, namely drums, bass, harmonic progression, and melody, which could be an instrument or vocal. Then dive deeper into each one. So for example, are these live or sample-based drums? What type of rhythm or beat is being used? Are the drums completely straight or is there a bit of swing? Go through each of the 4 main components and you'll eventually have a pretty clear mental picture of how to go about the production. Ultimately, reference tracks just act as a flagpole for staying on track and gives you something to lean on for guidance. This leads us on to mistake number 4. Not collaborating with other musicians. This is something I'm 100% guilty of. I used to be really good at this and would do about 3 sessions a week with other artists, but I also noticed that I was a lot more productive and could work much faster on my own. So naturally, I leaned into this and haven't actually done any in-person sessions in years. You see, what I didn't take into account when thinking I'm a lot more efficient when I work on my own is that music is a lot less fun when you're doing it on your own. Literally just having someone else in the room gives you a totally new perspective on the way you work and makes the whole process a lot more enjoyable. The thing is, it doesn't even have to be another musician or someone musically inclined. Just having the presence of another person in the room to act as a sounding board makes all the difference. Mistake number 5, not taking breaks. Music production can be a long, tiring process that requires a lot of concentration and focus. It's also really easy to just get sucked up into a project and not even realize the time flying by. Sometimes it could also be because of deadlines, so you try to push for longer just to get things done. This can be so counterproductive though. The longer you sit working on something, the easier it becomes to lose perspective and develop ear fatigue. Stepping out to take a break will almost always improve your work and overall state of mind. So there you have it. Although some of these mistakes may seem pretty straightforward and obvious, just being conscious of them will help you avoid them and almost certainly improve your work and overall enjoyment of the process. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.